And the floor is all yours, Karen, for the next 40 minutes. Thank you so much. Come on in.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Eric, thank you so much for asking me to speak. So I am a recovered alcoholic and addict. My name is Karen, and I learned through an old timer here in Barbados. I always identify as an addict, an alcoholic and as an addict first, and then my name, because I can always change my name, but I cannot change the fact that I have this disease, right? And through a sponsor who showed me through this big book, I was able to see myself. I can now say that I'm recovered from that hopeless state of mind and body. So I know I have 40 minutes to share, and I think the first 20 minutes, I like to call my story the illusion of power, right? Because I had that illusion of power not only when I was out there drinking, but when I struggled with recovery for about 20 years, okay? So I was born in South America. I grew up in but I moved to a small island in the Caribbean, very, very small. And growing up, I did not have a good reputation at all. And the thing is, I knew I had this disease. I now see I had this disease before I actually picked up the drink, right? Because there were other areas in my life where I was doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. And it got so bad that people just used to make up anything and everybody would believe it, right? Parents would tell their kids not to hang out with me, all of that. So I'm already in this state of, I don't feel like I belong. And a lot of us can relate to that. And I was one of these people who suicide was always an option for me. It was either I felt worthless, I felt hopeless, or I had this thinking of, well, if this doesn't work out, then I'll just take my life, right? Like that was always the option. And I started drinking when I was 17, which is kind of late in our world. And the night that I did it, I operated in a blackout. I don't remember much from it. I know I did a lot of stuff, passed out, and I woke up the next day wondering when I was going to do it again. Because I remember feeling good, like I felt like I belonged. Like in Bill's story when he said I had arrived, that's what I felt like. And, just to fast forward, I went to university, and university is when things really kind of kicked up. Now, in Bill's story, he does a lot of what we call a geographic change. And to any newcomers, what that means is I think that if I just leave this town, this city, this state, this country, I'll be okay. But I don't realize that when I move, I'm taking me with me, right? So I'm taking all of that stuff with me. It doesn't matter where I am. And so I didn't finish university. I had to leave, and that is when I moved to Barbados. So when I moved to Barbados, I was my first stint in AA. And I was there for about 4 months. And it was a joke because on my end, not the program here, on my end, it was a joke because I just ended up getting close to this woman. And all we used to do is just go out partying sober and go surfing, and just going to meetings and I'm talking. And in those days, you could smoke cigarettes in the meeting. So that's to tell you how long that was. And eventually what happened is I'm not doing anything. I'm just thinking that I'm not drinking, so that should be enough. But inevitably 4 months after, I get in a situation where I'm around family and I'm feeling nervous and tense and all of that. So what do? I go to that ease of comfort, right? I go to what I know is going to make me be lively and bubbly and feeling like I belong. So drank again. And the thing, the thing with this disease is in the beginning, for some of us, we're able to either quote unquote control it or quote unquote even be able to stop for a little bit. And for me, it was, I met a guy, I got pregnant and married. And during my pregnancy, I had no desire to drink. So I'm thinking that, those university days I just went a little out of control. That's what you do in university. And so I'm thinking that I'm not that bad. But what I did not realize is I'm living with untreated alcoholism. And what does that look like? So in the big book on page 52, it talks about the bedevilments. And anybody that's new, I want you to see if you relate to any of these, right? So this is how I was living with this untreated alcoholism. I'm not drinking, but this is how I'm living, right? I'm having trouble with personal relationships. I can't control my emotional natures. I'm a prey to misery and depression. I couldn't make a living. I had a feeling of uselessness. I was full of fear. I was unhappy. and I couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Spot on. That is exactly how I felt. And the thing is, you know, me and my husband didn't work out. He had his own things he was doing, and for years I blamed him. And I remember sitting in a meeting one day and it hit me, and I just felt so much empathy for him to be living with somebody with untreated alcoholism, right? So what would happen then is eventually I meet up with people who drank like me. And yes, drugs are a part of my story, and there are going to be parts that I have to bring it up. So please be patient with me with it, right? And you know, eventually we start living that life. And I'm telling myself, I'll stop when I'll stop. If it gets too bad, I know what to do. You know what I mean? But I'm not ready to stop. You know, that illusion of power. I'm telling myself that I can control this. I know how far I went last time. And not only that, I'm not only leaning on those substances to feel connected in this world, or whatever you want to call it, but I'm also depending on human aid. So these friends and the boyfriend that I have, I'm depending on them to give me value, to make my insides feel good and all of that. But inevitably, those substances and those humans fail me. It says so in the big book, right? And I don't have anything else to depend on. Now, let's jump to 2012. 2012 was a year for me, and anybody could think about if this relate to this, where it was just a dark period. I would wake up every day and it would just be this dark filter on the world. And I would wake up every day vexed that I was still alive, right? Why am I still living? I would do this thing where on my days off, I would get big bottles of rum and drink until I throw up and pass out, and get up and grab it again and do the same thing, ingesting other things as well. And there was one day where I said, I had enough. This is the day. This is going to be the day. And I had this big plan where I was going to took the last of the little bits of money I had in my bank account, went and had a blast breakfast, went and bought some alcohol and some other things, went to a part of the island I didn't think anybody was going to find me, and tried to take my life. And I'm doing this thing, and I'm trying and I'm trying and I'm trying, and I pass out because I've been drinking so long. And the only reason why I moved from that spot was because I ran out of alcohol. I need to get more alcohol. So I went to buy it, and I was so messed up that I couldn't go back to where I was. So I tried to hide somewhere else. Long story short, my ex-husband found me. I was a mess. They threw me in the psychiatric hospital for 2 weeks. And then at the time in Barbados, there wasn't a women's rehab. They only had an outpatient for women, but they were like, no, you need to go to an actual rehab. So they sent me to another island to a rehab. So I was in rehab for 6 months. And you know, in rehab, listen, there's some of us who need to be in those protected walls, right? There's some of us who need to be. In that rehab, we kind of started working on the steps, but it was more thing about being assertive, being, you know, all of those and everything. And I remember about a week before I was to come back to Barbados, I was driving the car with my counselor, and I just felt this cold feeling in my body, because I was like, hang on, y'all have taken away the alcohol and all this stuff away from me. Now you're telling me I have to be this person. I don't know who this person is. And I felt like I was spinning out of control. So they said to me, when you get back, go to meetings, all of that. I did that. I went to meetings, but this is what I would do. I would go to meetings, sit there, listen. The woman would come up to me and be like, get a sponsor. I'm like, yeah. Quickly leave the meeting, go back home. And this is what happened. There's a story in the big book with Jim where it says that he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And the way we enlarge our spiritual life is through these steps. And inevitably, what happens to him, he goes into that bar with all these crazy reasons. He's going to find somebody to buy a car from him and all of that. And he has the insane idea of putting the whiskey in the milk. And that's what happened to me. I had this insane idea. I really wanted to drink. So I had this insane idea that if I go and I buy the smallest bottle of vodka, right? Just a small one. One is small, nobody gonna smell it, and it's only gonna be for tonight. All those lies I tell myself. In the big book, it talks about that mental blank spot we have where we don't remember the consequences from an hour ago, a day ago, a month ago, a year ago. And even if we do remember them, we're able to justify why this time it will be different. So on this end, it's like, hey, Karen, do you remember you was just in rehab for 6 months? You had to be taken away from your child. It was very traumatic for her. You were in the psychiatric hospital. And I was like, yeah, but it's just going to be for tonight, right? Also in the big book, it talks about if I don't have the defense that comes from a higher power, I will pick up again. And this is where I have to bring in a bit of my thing with drugs into the story. So please bear with me. So I had that night where I had the vodka, and then eventually the bottles started getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And where I was living, there was these people downstairs I used to hang with, and they're like, come on down. I was like, all right. And we're sitting there talking, and the guy just pulls out some coke and he sniffs it, and immediately I go, can I have some? No defense, right? And so that was a whole year of not eating, not feeding my child. My house is a mess. I'm paranoid. I'm looking out of windows. I'm sitting in the bushes at 2 o'clock in the morning because there's men outside my house and I'm going to get them with a rock, you know? And eventually my ex-husband realizes, I think you're drinking again. And I'm like, no, 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 I'm not. I'm not. And eventually he says, okay, well, tomorrow we're going to go and do some tests. Now, remember I said suicide for me was always an option. And many times during my drinking times and struggling with recovery, I have tried. And there's this disinfectant in Barbados called Jay's Fluid, which is a very strong disinfectant. And I told myself, I'm going to drink this thing because I'm going to die. When he comes and he finds me, I'm not going to be alive. But God was like, no, not time for you now. So I go back to 12 step. I go back to 8. The thing is that what I didn't realize, I didn't understand my disease. I didn't understand. I'm just thinking, because I come in with this gift of desperation, I don't want to go back to that life. And please understand me when I say this. I'm thinking that if I just do meetings and I just do service, that's going to be enough, right? The steps. And the thing is, every time I went back into those rooms, I would be handed the big book and told, go read it. No, the big book is very heavy language. It needs to be somebody goes through and, this is what this means. This is what that means. So when I'm reading it and I'm seeing this D and die and all that stuff, I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? And I can't, right? And so inevitably what would happen is, yes, I'm away and I'm surrounded when I'm going to meetings, but what happens when I leave those meetings, right? What happens when I'm not doing service in those meetings and I go home and I'm trying to deal with life and my mind is still a fucking mess? So I have 9 months of abstinence because it wasn't sobriety, relapse, out for 7 months. Come back in. So what do? I up the meetings and I up the service. But steps, and then inevitably what happens again? Back out again. So I'm out again for 8 months. So I come back in and I'm like, all right, I really need to give it my all here, right? But again, all I'm focusing on are meetings and service. And please, again, I'm not saying meetings and service are not important, but they're not enough for me to have that psychic change that I need that comes through the steps. And I'll talk about that. So I come back in, and I'm abstinent for 3 years. I was telling people I was sober for 3 years, but I'm abstinent. And what that means is I am a dry drunk. And what that means is those bedevilments that I read in the beginning, I'm living that way. On the outside, I'm smiling and I'm like, yeah, this is great. But on the inside, I am a mess. I'm sad, I'm miserable. I can't deal with life, all of that. During that time, there was a lady who came to Barbados and she came to one of our meetings. And she said to me, she said, you're going to relapse again. And I think it's in Fred's story, it talks about where he says he believes he has enough will and he has enough self-knowledge that he's not going to relapse, right? And that's exactly what I thought too. I was like, how dare she, And she tried her best to go through this book with me. And I was thinking like, you're just too fanatic. Like, this ain't for me. And I stopped working with her. And, the thing is that the issue that I would do with recovery is I would be judging my external by how sober I am, right? So I would be going through this cycle where I pick up and I, go through that spree and I come in and I come to 12-step recovery, but the steps over here I'm not doing, and the other strategies I put in place, which could be a job, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, friends, family. I'm putting those strategies in place rather than working on the 12 steps. And then inevitably, I just go round and round the circle again. So I know a lot of people feel like when you relapse is because something bad happens. And I have to say, I absolutely disagree with that, because the big book talks about it starts with our thinking, right? That's the crux of the problem. And just like in Fred's story, where before he relapsed, he had no problems on the horizon or something like that. It's the same thing for me. 3 years in, sitting on the beach, day off from work, me and my boyfriend, and I'm sitting there just looking out. And all of a sudden I hear in my mind, right? And I go, yeah, talking to myself. And it goes, you know what would be good later? Some alcohol and some coke. And I go, you're right. That would be good later. And the thing is, the lie that I tell myself is, it's only going to be for tonight. Just for tonight. And I'll stop. All of a sudden, tonight turned into a week, then a month, then by summer, by the end of summer, by my daughter's birthday, by Christmas, I need to be done. I need to be done. And it's just getting worse, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. And I really did try to stop. I tried going back to meetings. I just wasn't ready, right? And this is the thing with this disease, right? Step 1, it talks about that powerless and manageability. And I'll go through the steps quickly in the last 20 minutes. But that allergy that we have is different from other allergies, right? When I have the consequences of the allergy from, say, like a strawberry, and I break out in hives, I don't pick up another fucking strawberry, right? But with this allergy we have with this disease, once I put one in, it kicks off that phenomena of craving, and I want 2, and I want 3, and I want 4. And the thing is, right? I may relapse again, and I might pick up one and be like, okay, I'm not, and a whole week may pass and I might not, but inevitably it will get where I am continuously, because that phenomenal craving just kicks in. But the last time that I relapsed, it didn't take long. I remember like the night I spent all my money, all the money I had. I was supposed to, my background is in tour guiding. I was supposed to have a tour the next day where I worked. I somehow convinced the people that it was a rainy day. It's not a good day to come, blah, blah, blah. Left work, went, booked this little apartment and just drank, and all money gone. That's how fast it takes me. And this is the lies that I tell myself. So the last day that I drank and used, which was in 2020, what I would do is, this would be my daily routine. Steal money from my ex-husband. I would buy those big, big bottles of vodka, because again, I'm thinking, ain't nobody gonna smell it, which is just ridiculous, right? The big, and I also used to contact my dealer as well. And I remember that morning, I'm sitting in the car waiting for the dealer, drinking this thing straight from the bottle. And I didn't want to do it. I did not want to do it today. But there was no way I was starting my car and leaving. So I'm drinking all day, I'm doing all this other stuff all day. And that night I was at this bar, and you know, that kind of drunk where you're just like slurring and just, like this. And I said to my friend, I said, if there's a scale between wanting to stop and not wanting to stop, I feel like I'm right here, right? And I left there in the car and got into a really bad accident. I wasn't driving my car, totaled the car. It wasn't my fault, but it didn't help that I was so drunk and so high, right? I want to share a picture with you guys. I'm going to share a picture with you because, well, first let me say, so I get into this accident and I went to the hospital, and I'm sitting in the chair bleeding all over the people's chairs. And that lady who 3 years ago had said to me, you are going to relapse again. And the thing she was telling me, all of a sudden it clicked. And I realized how absolutely fucked I was, right? So I'm going to share a picture with you guys. This is a picture of me the day after I came out of the hospital. And I'll tell you the reason that I'm sharing this picture with you. So this is me after the day after. And there are two reasons why I'm showing this picture. One, sometimes I feel for newcomers, when you hear somebody who's been in for a little bit and you hear their story, it's really hard to imagine them in that state. So I really want you guys to see the depths of what I got to with this disease. Also, I knew that if I did not totally surrender to this program, I could have this picture up on my wall every day and wake up and see it every day. And if I didn't totally surrender to this program, which means the 12 steps, I could see this picture every day. And eventually my disease would tell me, yeah, you just went a little overboard that time, right? So when I came back in, there was the height of COVID. So I am a Zoom baby. I am extremely grateful for the Zoom meetings. I've been able to get on a lot of really great meetings like this one. And there were two things I was going to do different. I was going to do meetings, I was going to do service, but I need a sponsor today. And also it was really important to me what type of meetings I was attending. All right. People don't like me when I say this, but I'm going to say it. I did not want to be attending what I call shoelace meetings. And what that means is where somebody comes in and talks for about 8 minutes about their shoelace that broke that day. And me as a newcomer is sitting there like, so how am I supposed to stay sober? Now hear me out. In meetings, you have newcomers who will come in and they just, bleh, right? Yes, because you're living in that mess. I think it's the responsibility of recovered members when they're sharing to be sharing the message of solution, right? Good. So I found these really great meetings. I got a sponsor and we did the steps, but I didn't feel like I could take somebody else through the steps. And that was really important to me. So a few months after that, there was a lady who did a share and I was just in awe of this woman, not her specifically, but her relationship with her higher power, right? Because I've always wanted some type of relationship with a higher power. I mean, I grew up Anglican, which I'm sorry if any Anglicans in here, is one of the most boring religions ever. So when I had to leave, when I could leave, I left, right? And I wanted a more spiritual relationship with something that was higher than me, and tried all kind of things, reading self-help books. They talk about this in the book, self-help books, this, that, but I wasn't open to that stuff. So just in awe of this woman's relationship with her higher power. And she said she was doing the step workshop. Absolutely. Can I be a part of it? So it's probably about me and 6 other people. She took us through the steps. And I'm just going to go through my experience with the steps, seriously doing the steps. One of the things I tell my sponsees is if we're doing the work together, it has to be consistently. This ain't well, we're going to do some of the steps now and then stop for 2 months, because if I want to have that spiritual experience, I need consistency, right? I can't, it's not like going to the gym where I just decide like, yeah, I'm just going to go for the month of June or some bullshit like that, right? So let's talk about step 1. My life, I'm powerless and my life is unmanageable. The thing is, y'all, I was easily admitting that I was powerless and my life was unmanageable. Easily, I was doing that for years. But when it changed from admitting to accepting, everything changed for me, right? And the thing with step one is she's supposed to show me how absolutely fucked up. It's supposed to make me feel like there's no hope. That's what step 1 is supposed to do. I remember I was working with this girl one time and we were going through it and she just stopped. She goes, well, fuck. And I said, yes, exactly. That's what I want to hear, right? And I have some people who talk about, well, my life wasn't unmanageable. I still had my job. My family was still talking to me. I still had money. Yeah. But how you were feeling on the inside? Were you living in those bedevilments? I'm sure you were, right? So if I realize that I cannot depend on human aid, that I'm powerless and my life is unmanageable. Then this brings us to step 2, right? Where it talks about the willingness to believe in a higher power. Came to believe, right? And I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't one of these people that struggled with that. I know there's some people who come in and hear people refer to their higher power as God, right? And immediately get no, because of their complicated relationship with maybe, from childhood with going to church or with God and whatnot, and they don't want to hear it. Thing is, you hear this a lot. This is not a religious program, it's a spiritual one. Some people call it God, God say higher power God, some say the universe, some say whatever energy and stuff like that. And I always tell my people I work with, what I want you to do is all those preconceived notions you have about what you think a higher power should be from your childhood, just let it go. And I want you to write a list of what the characteristics of what you want your higher power to be, right? What you've always wanted. And we write that in the back of their big book. So let's talk about step 3. I think it was in one of you guys' meetings, because I used to come in and do the 1, 2, 3 dance. And I heard somebody say, I don't know if it was you, Eric, I'm not sure, but I heard somebody say, no, it was actually the 1, 2 dance, right? Because I'm not turning my will and my life over in step 3. And I was like, damn, that's true. So step 3 talks about turning my will and my life over to this higher power. I made a decision to do so. And it was only this last time that I realized part of that decision is deciding to do the rest of the steps so that I can turn my will and my life over. Because I cannot do that when I still have resentments, fears, selfish sexual activity, all of that stuff. I cannot have it because they say, and then it's also this disease is like a 3-layered thing, right? I have body, mind, spiritual. And it talks about the part of my problem is that selfishness and self-centeredness, which all these other things root from. If I don't take care of that spiritual, eventually what happens is my mind is a fucking mess. And my disease tells me I don't have a disease. And then, so what do? I pick up one and we know one is it, and I go on, right? So this is why we need to go on with the steps to be able to turn our will and our life over and to get rid of that selfishness and self-centeredness. So step 4, we did it in sections. And what I loved about how my sponsor did it with me, every time we did a section, we had prayers around it, right? So for instance, when I did fairs, we did the fair prayer around fairs that would come up. When I had the defects that I came out of my narratives, we did the 7-step prayer around it. And one of the things I love that she did, she said to me, when we talk about resentments, we always think about the big ones, right? But she said, like when you have a pebble in your shoe and you're just walking around on it all day, and it's not stopping you from walking, but it bothers you. She's like, sometimes we have these pebbles of resentment. And she said to list those as well. And I did. And my list grew from like 15 to like 60 or something like that. And so the question I get asked by when I'm taking people through is, what if I don't remember something? And I tell them, look, there's a difference between genuinely at this time not remembering something, because I guarantee you, as you go on, you're going to be doing something mundane like washing dishes, and then you'll be like, oh shit, right? And you'll remember something. So there's a difference between genuinely at this time not remembering something and intentionally leaving something up, right? That's the difference. And I knew there was one thing that I really didn't want to share, but I knew I had to share and I was going to share, but it was like the last thing I shared. So step 5, when we basically go through our step 4 with saying it to a human and God, that is when I had my spiritual experience. Because that hour meditation that happens after. So I'm sitting in that hour meditation. Of course, there are some times where I'm just like, mind gets distracted. But I had 2 very clear-cut instructions from my higher power. One was to ask the lady who was doing the step work to be my sponsor. And two, I finally understood what step 3 was telling me, which I just talked about, in that I cannot turn my will and my life over if I'm still living in these defects and resentments. And also, turning my will and my life over is a human thing that when something happens to us, we're talking to everybody else about it. We're not talking to God. Again, I call my higher power God. This is not the church God that we're talking about, right? So I need to go up first before I go out. And that's what I tend to do. Talk to God about it. Cuss, if I have to, this is how I'm feeling, whatever, and talk to him. And then talk to like my sponsor and people that I trust in recovery if I need to. So step 6 and 7, when we looked at defects, because of the way that I did step 4, it was very easy for me to pull out and identify my defects. Did the 7-step prayer around it. And this is the thing, I've heard people say, hey, what defect are you working on today? Well, if I could work on my defects, then I wouldn't be sitting in 12-step recovery, would I? Right? So again, this is where tools come in, and I need to do the prayers that are around it, the 7-step prayer. And what I find is the more that I do it, the more that I recognize when I'm living in defects, right? And I also did Drop the Rock workshop around step 6 and 7. Listen, I went into that workshop thinking like, yeah, I'm working a good recovery, and I just came out of it feeling beat up. Like, it's really, really good if you ever have a chance to do a Drop the Rock workshop. Anyway, all right. So step 8, it talks about listing the people that we need to make amends to. And what I loved is that my sponsor did is that she had me do 2 lists. People that at this time I was absolutely willing to make amends to, and people that I was not willing to. And then she would tell me the people on the not willing list, I need to pray for the willingness for them to go from this list to that list. Because if I'm not making genuine amends and I'm just doing this because my sponsor told me, I'm still coming from a place of selfishness and self-centeredness, right? And I have had people that I have prayed and asked, please let me be willing, and they have gone over to that list. Now, I'm in a kind of unique situation in that I've lived a lot of places, and I don't have any social media. So there's a lot of people on that list that I don't have access to. And all I do is just say to God, please one day let them put in my path so I can make these amends. And the way that I would have treated them, I don't treat people that way now, right? And it's funny because every few months, somebody from the list will just be constantly on my mind. And I know that's intuitive thought telling me it's time, right? So steps 10, 11, and 12, a lot of people call them the maintenance steps. My sponsor calls them the growth steps, because if I'm not growing from them, then, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, growing. So with step 10 is where I basically take my inventory like on a daily, right? And that's not nightly inventory, that's step 11 we're talking about, right? So this is where I make sure that I'm not living each day in like fear, dishonesty, selfishness, all of that. If I do that and I upset somebody, I make amends. Now, again, please understand that I'm human, okay? And I'm going to feel human emotions. And I allow myself to feel them, but I don't allow myself to stay in them too long. Because if I stay in them too long, we know where that could lead me. Back up the steps to back up to step 1 out, right? With step 11, doing with prayer and meditation in the morning, one of the things I do before I even pick up my phone, when you roll over and you boop, 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 before I even do that is the 3rd-step prayer, 7-step prayer. So do some meditation as well. Very short, 10 minutes. I'm not sitting for half an hour, I can't do it. And at night is doing my nightly inventory where I look at if I'm holding on to resentment. Have I been selfish, dishonest? Do I owe an apology? Have I been living in fear? Was I kind and loving towards all? What could I have done better? Was I thinking of myself? Was I thinking of others? And what my sponsor does, which I love, I absolutely love, she has me send her my inventory every night, not for us to sit down and go pick it apart. It's twofold. 1, it keeps us in contact. 2, if she sees a pattern happening, she'll say, we need to talk about this, right? And I absolutely love doing it. So let's talk about step 12. So step 12 basically is telling me what I have just been passed on, I need to pass on to other, and I need to practice these principles in all my affairs. And the thing is, if I'm just doing these steps just for me and I'm not participating and doing step 12, I'm still coming from a place of selfish and self-centeredness, right? Because it's for me to pass on. And I've had very different experiences with sponsees. I've had where we start the work and then they disappear on me. I've had who've gone through the steps and then relapsed. I've had people who relapsed in the middle of doing it. There's this one girl I'm working with, and I know that God put her in my life for a reason. So one of the things that I learned is when things happen to me in life, they're not happening to me, they're happening for me to show me what defects I'm still living in. Because I could all day say, yes, I'm practicing patience, and then something happens and I'm not. So instead of being like, why is it that this is happening? It's like, well, this is happening to show me what defects I'm still living in. And this girl that I'm working with, her story is so similar to mine. It's the same thing she's doing in recovery, all of that. And God is just showing me like, this is what you are like. And how the people around you have to deal with you as well, you know? And I just have to realize that everybody has their journey. I'm practicing these principles in all my affairs. Look, all of these things, it's basically like a muscle. I have to just keep doing it. Am I going to fail? Yes, there are times that I absolutely fail and I have to make amends to people. Sometimes that thing with alcoholics where we're, what is it that is called? Where we're egocentric and but insecure on the inside. Yes, you know, sometimes that flares up as well. But the thing is what I find doing these steps has helped me with is, I don't know about y'all, but I always felt like I was just fighting life my whole life, right? Like I just went through life just like swinging, you know? And I find like recovery has helped me to kind of flow a little bit better with life. So I just want to talk to newcomers here, right? Is there's one, I would say, you don't have time. You don't. Get a sponsor, totally surrender to this program, and your life will change. Okay. You cannot expect that, you know, seeing somebody who's been in for a bit and has worked the steps that you're gonna like, you can't question like why I don't feel that way. Well, you still have a lot of work to do, right? And then a lot of people worry about what is it that I'm gonna do now that I'm not drinking anymore. And I always say, like, you know, if you have the opportunity to go to face-to-face meetings and be part of that social aspect, I didn't have that doing Zoom meetings. But, you know, do that social stuff. And I think it's really important to have hobbies as well. And I'm not one of these people who thinks that 12 steps is the end all be all of everything. I don't agree with that. I think that some of us need extra help. I feel like 12 steps gives us a groundwork, a base to where to start, where we can be more open and honest in those other things that we may need. One last thing I want to talk about too is fear, right? Because we know that all of us are driven by 100 forms of fear. I think that's what it says in the book. And I always tell people, fear is not, like, fear is a human emotion where we're going to feel scared about some things, right? But when it says living in fear means I'm living in defects. And I'll give you some examples. For a few years, I was like, I haven't paid taxes. I don't know. I'm just, so what I would do is withdraw, right? Not be responsible, not deal with it, you know, so I'm living in those defects. And eventually God gave me the courage to go to the place and be like, hey, I have it. And basically like, oh, you don't owe anything. I was like, are you kidding? I'm living in all this fear for how long? And I'm doing these defects. So when I say I'm living in fear, it's I'm living in those defects that come out of that, where I be withdrawn or I lash out or I'm angry or sad. It's not just the normal fear that we feel, right? And I know everybody says this, but another thing I find that recovery has given me is the opportunity to think of others and to being grateful, because being grateful is not a normal feeling for me. It's something I really have to work at, right? And for a long time, when I say a long time, maybe about 2 years into my recovery, I realized that I still hadn't forgiven myself. because I could still see the effects of my alcoholism had on my daughter, our relationship, where I am in life, how behind I felt in life, all of that. And it took some time for me to get to a place of forgiveness and acceptance of this is just how it is. I'm not living that life anymore, and I just need to start from there, right? So again, anybody that's doing that struggling, please find a sponsor, please totally surrender, do the steps, get involved, do meetings, do service, but most importantly, do these steps, because I do these steps and along the way I have a spiritual experience and my thinking changes. Let me tell you a quick story. You know that defense that comes from where you're doing these things on a daily and you have that, because there's a difference between a belief and a connection, the higher power. I remember I was out somewhere with my cousin and his wife, and she ordered this really strange drink I never heard of. And she was sitting across from me and she sipped it. And I said, "How'd it taste?" She's like, "Oh, girl, do you want to sip?" And like in the depths of my mind, like, you know, if somebody is surrounded by walls and they shout and you kind of hear them, I heard, "Yes." But it was like very faint. And I knew that was only because of the program that I worked, that those walls, the defense that my higher power gave me, right? So I think that's all I'm going to share. Eric, thank you so much for asking me to share. And newcomers, just get on it. It's definitely worth it. Thank you.